Excellent. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Data People workshop. I'm so excited. My name is Amit. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Data People. And today we're going to talk about efficiency and productivity. But while we wait for people to get started and get situated, folks on the call, tell us where you're calling in from. I suspect my co-presenter today is probably one of the furthest geographically away, Martin, calling in from Singapore.
Yes, I am, Amit. It's just gone 10 o'clock on Wednesday night here in Singapore.
I appreciate it, Martin, for coming in this late. We've got people from all over the US. The last time we spoke, I think the last workshop we did, the furthest person was in New Zealand. So we'll see if we can get all the
Okay.
way around the world in that way.
Well,
Uh,
that's certainly much further than Singapore. That's another 10 hours south. That's about as far as you can get away from the US, I think, New Zealand.
I think that's almost some diametrically opposite. And
Yeah, I think so.
well, we have folks from the UK and the Bay Area and Scottsdale, Arizona. So I'm also amazed to see people on the West Coast, given how early it is on the West Coast. So if you're joining us on the West Coast, thank you for joining. Um, Martin, while we wait for folks to again just assemble, I also want to be talking productivity today. And I'd love to hear from you all on the chat as to what is your number one non-work, non-professional productivity hack? What's the life hack that you've discovered in the last year? Martin, anything comes to mind?
Well, wow, that's putting me on the spot now.
I'm putting you on the spot. I can start.
uh,
Oh, you think? Go ahead.
yeah, a life hack. You start, Amit. What do
Yeah,
you think?
I threw it out. So I've been muddling around a lot with AI, and I
Right,
figured out I was really struggling to find an illustrator for a children's book I wanted to write for my
right.
godson. And the
Okay.
latest version of ChatGPT's image generation was fantastic. I could take photographs and convert them into these beautiful illustrations and make it into a children's book in like a few hours. Now, the hardest part was then finding a publisher and getting it published. So I'm going to get my copy in a couple of weeks.
Oh, well, that's a great one. I look forward to seeing the book. Yeah, getting a signed copy, right?
Exactly. I'm going to be a published
Yeah,
author soon. All right.
yeah.
Bridget
I know.
says, go ahead, Martin.
I was going to say for me, like, similar play with the GPTs. I'm a Gemini fan, to be honest, and
Mhm.
I have to say the new version that they came out recently, where you can do the 8-second video, is amazing. It's so incredible what you can do. So I kind of play around a little bit
What
with
do you do
that.
the
So
8 second
you
video? What kind of videos are you making?
So I can make fun videos. So the recent fun one I did was a cat driving a convertible off the side of a cliff. So just playing with it, and I just let it go and fill in all the blanks. It was just incredible. As the cat went over the cliff in the car, it went meow. So it's a classic.
That is
Very, very good.
fantastic.
Yes.
All right, folks. I want to make a few things clear for everyone in the audience. Firstly, this is not a webinar. This is a workshop. We're going to do things together, and we've done in our previous workshops. It's the best part is we all learn from each other. Now, Martin's obviously a expert with decades in recruiting, and but we're going to learn from him. But I want to learn from all of you. All of you have figured out techniques, tips, amazing things, and we're going to share. We're going to share our AI cheat sheet, prompt cheat sheet on this chat as well. So if you want to work along when we get into that section of today's conversation, if you want to open up Gemini or ChatGPT or any or Copilot and try it with us, we would love that. Let's keep this super interactive and let's make sure that, we're not here to lecture, we're here to learn. But with that, let's get into the meat and potatoes of today. Martin, let's start with you. And you've had an incredible career. I mean, you've done everything in TA possible, and you've had, really thinking about sourcing and sourcing strategy last at Grab. You know, Tell us a little bit about how did you fall into TA?
Well, like most people, I did fall into it. I actually started in computing, actually mainframe computing, capacity planning, performance tuning was my background. And I had someone who joined a recruitment company, and I thought, oh, this will be a bit of a change. So I did that, and I kind of that's how I got into recruitment. And because I had that technology background, even in the early days, this is kind of the late 90s, LinkedIn and that kind of didn't exist and stuff. I had a bit of a knack for sourcing, right? I really liked the sourcing piece of it. So that's kind of where I kind of pivoted to. So that's pretty much been my, even though I've done end-to-end recruitment, I'm very much focused on that kind of critical sourcing engagement piece. So, and I do love the thrill of the chase. So yeah, give me the hardest role and I'll take it on. So that's my background.
So I'm gonna have to ask you then, what is the hardest role that you've had to source?
Oh, one of the hardest ones was probably at Grab actually, when the AT, the CEO, asked me to go and find a Mandarin speaking general counsel who was highly connected to the tech tech leaders in China, who had taken companies to IPO on the Nasdaq. And I actually
It's like
happened,
four people, but
yeah, I actually happened to find a guy. And as it was quite funny, actually, this guy was actually Australian, originally from Australia, but spent a lot of his life in Hong Kong and China, spoke fluent Mandarin, and had worked with many of the large Chinese tech companies and taken them to IPO on the Nasdaq. So, yeah, so
what
that's
a
probably the
fantastic
hardest.
story.
So, yeah, it
Folks,
took us a long time, but we got it there.
that's incredible. I'm going to ask you all in the chat, what is the hardest role you've ever had to source? Some of the craziest ones I've seen are, I've saw like a front-end engineer who needs aviation experience. Like you just see some of the
Oh, wow.
craziest roles in places. I'd love to hear from all of you. And Martin, you're an amateur sommelier. What's the favorite wine you're drinking right now? What's top of the list this year?
Um, I do, as I get a bit older, I like the kind of the more the mid kind of wine. So being from Australia, I used to like the big heavy Shirazes, but that now sends me to sleep, right? So I tend to kind of like my Pinots. So a nice Pinot, yeah. So I don't really have any preferred, although I do love American wine, and Portuguese wine is another really great wine that I like too. But yeah, the lighter Pinots, because then it doesn't send me to sleep.
For those here in the US, it's still morning. Unfortunately, we cannot partake. But for Martin, it's 10 p.m. And so it's a very different story.
Cheers.
Cheers. So let's talk a little bit about why we chose this topic. And I want to get into how we're going to approach it today. In the last few workshops we've done, there's two big themes. Everyone's so focused on AI and the productivity unlock it can receive. But one of the things that surprised me is how incredibly capacity strapped our TA teams are, more than they've ever been. In fact, it made us look at our data. We track the jobs of we track companies in 85 countries. Our customers use us in 85 countries around the world. And we saw these two big trends. On average, their talent acquisition teams globally, we're seeing this trend in the US and in EU and in Asia Pacific. They're having about 25% less headcount than they used to 2 or 3 years ago, during 2021, 2022. But on average, and we see this in our usage statistics, the number of recs that our users are putting out, each user, each recruiter is typically responsible for anywhere from 30 to 60%, on average 50% more recs. And that's kind of nuts. You think hiring is slowing, and it isn't. Like you think, oh, TA is going to be so much freer. And if anything, we're seeing, I'm hearing and seeing in our system, in our logs, recruiters handling 25, 30 different types of recs at the same time, and the amount of stress and the amount of pressure. So I'm going to ask again in the audience, is that consistent? Are you seeing that too? Are you feeling that too? Because it feels, and Martin, like, you've been advising a lot of companies and helping build a lot of strategy. Is that what you're seeing on the field as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and speaking down here in Asia, I think it's very similar to probably what you're experiencing in North America. The other thing that I would say about this, and I agree with you 100%, but the other thing I would say is that because there's less, like hiring managers are either hiring less people, so they're more picky. So
Yeah.
that also impacts, the workload on the TA because, the hiring manager wants, more candidates, or more variety. So that makes it tough as well. So I think, they've got that head count and they want to make sure they spend it wisely. So they're really pushing, for that really top candidate all the time.
That's right. It is just, it's getting harder on every front, and it just
Mm, mm.
feels overwhelming, if I'm being honest. And so this is sort of where this acute, if you're a TA leader or if you're a recruiter, where does one find 50% capacity? And that's sort of the topic Martin and I are going to dive into today, in as tactical a way. And I know a lot of you on this call have found capacity hacks. You've found ways to unlock productivity, and I really want to learn from you as well. So let's start to think about that, and let's get into, so one of the lessons I've had is, well, I say hacks a lot today, but it's really about habits, both personal habits as an individual recruiter, individual contributor, and organizational habits. And so we've been sort of studying highly successful sort of recruiting teams. And so what we wanted to do was identify 5 key habits that we're seeing in sort of the highest performance teams today. And I come at it with data. Martin has an incredible amount of experience, and all of you have an incredible amount of experience. So let's get into this. So let's start with the habit number 1, which is know where to optimize. One of the things, Martin, that I'm feeling, we're in a world where it's AI overload, right? Everyone's trying to sell you more and more tooling and
Yeah,
agentic, and it feels like, oh my gosh, I should implement it all. Oh my God, I should implement every piece. But some of these things, one, may not solve the problem you have, and two, is some of these things have like a 9-month implementation cycle. And so like they will
yeah.
solve your problem, but by that time the technology has changed. When you go in as a leader, what's the first thing you're looking at a new organization when you're thinking about, okay, let's improve the TA function here?
Yeah, there's three things, right? So and technology is the third, right? It's not the first.
Yeah,
It's it's capability, which is about the people, right? So do we have the right skills, in the right place? Are people playing in their best position? The second thing is process. Like I'm not someone that puts process in for the sake of making it difficult, but from my experience, I know that having really good processes, simple processes, not complex processes, what that does is create consistent engagement. And when you have consistent engagement,
hmm
then you can kind of wrap the technology around those processes and the capability. Because, especially when we get under pressure, we tend to throw the process out the window, and when we take the path of least resistance. That's when we actually should be applying it, right?
That's
So,
right.
if you think about the technology out there now, like every time every morning you turn your laptop on, there's another vendor who says they can solve your problem, right? I kind of have this vision of the TA turning up at work in the morning, and they walk out of the lift and they strap the tool belt onto their waist, and they've got 80 tools hanging off it, weighing them down, rather than focusing on the 5 that can get the job done
Yeah,
consistently, and cut out all that noise. And it's very hard to do that. But there's certain discipline that you need to bring to do that. So that's kind of the things that I look at. So unclutter, remove all the noise. That's where I think really the focus needs to go.
I love it. The Marie Kondo way of recruiting. Um, unclutter it all. The number one mistake that I'm seeing when we look at sort of the differences between a high performance recruiting team and a low performance recruiting team is, um, the lower, people who are trying to bring capacity in quickly make this mistake of trying to optimize everything. So they want to
Yeah,
have like small 2%, 2%, 2%, 3% gains in every part of the funnel. And the truth
yeah,
is, and I suspect many of you saw this and see this as well in your funnel, there's 20% of your recs, 20% of your process. There's like often one sticking bottleneck that is dragging down your time and the time of your team. And the heart of it is sort of, it's that, you know, it's that old adage, right? The the smartest would lumberjack or whatever spends 90% of his time sharpening the knife and only 10% of the time cutting.
yeah.
Like you're just looking for the right point. So I wanted to sort of talk about indicators. So where exactly is your problem? And I'll be honest, I think sometimes it feels anecdotally like our problems are everywhere, or sometimes it feels anecdotally that our problems are, right now, for example. Everyone's getting a lot of spam applicants. So it feels like that is the burning problem of the hour. But it actually might be very simple to remove your spam applicants. There's really good ways to do that right in most ATSs now. So where is the real capacity bottleneck that you're grappling with? I want to give you sort of a few indicators. So first is, are you inundated with applicants? Is there an applicant quality problem? Is there a spam problem? One of the first things I would check is your pass-through rates. Your pass-through rate 0.5%. That is, are you on average needing to get 100, 200 plus applications in order to make a hire? If that's the case, you have an applicant quality problem. I'm amazed. I think we all kind of gravitate here. We all feel like we have an applicant quality problem, but most companies, if you're hiring on site, on average, you're making a hire every 53, 54 applications. So it's not an applicant quality. It might be a different problem. So let's get to that. The second is scheduling chaos. And I say chaos twice because I really wanted to emphasize it. But it's scheduling is something that people like hate doing. It's the worst. But is it affecting it? Is solving scheduling going to solve your problem? That's another thing to think about. Like, and I look at it as drop-off rates going is your drop-off rates are spiking? It's worth looking at it. If your drop-off rates aren't spiking, it's going to be nice to have, but it's not going to unlock capacity. Sourcing effectiveness. It's really important if you're sourcing heavily. And one of the things that we have to recognize is we've gutted a lot of our sourcing teams, so we're losing sourcing capabilities. So there is going to be a sourcing effectiveness loss. If you're asking generalist recruiters to do sourcing, it's harder. And then hiring manager support and poor channel ROI. And one of the things that we heard a lot is, I feel like one of the dissonances I hear a lot is when I ask people what is the number one problem they have, it's almost a lot of times it's hiring manager, it's internal bureaucracy, it's that sort of thing. But a lot of times that we're trying to find an easy hack for one of these other problems because it feels easier than tackling the hiring manager problem. Martin, I'm going to ask you, is that consistent? Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, pretty much. I think what I see a lot is hiring managers when they're not getting their role filled fast enough. They'll always say top of funnel issue, right, or quality issue, right, which sometimes is the case, but more often than not, it's actually what I see as middle of funnel as a lot of the issues where the candidates don't go into interview fast enough. Like if we talk about speed in recruiting, where there should be speed is when you've got candidates, you've shortlisted them, you think they're a good fit, you should be applying speed to get them through the interview process, right? I don't see that enough, right? Because hiring managers don't make themselves available, but also they've got their real job to do, not just the recruiting part. So I think that there's obviously root causes, but I think there's also other underlying things that we don't look at, or we make some assumptions, right, and we don't really dig into what's really going on. So I think a lot of it to me, like recruiting is a team sport, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that alignment up front, then all this sort of stuff is going to come home to roost. And it's very hard to fix it as you go, right? So you've got to identify it up front.
Impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, given your expertise in sourcing, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot from recruiting leaders is how much sourcing effectiveness has dropped. Part of it is just so much AI generated spam that candidates are getting. It's overwhelming. Great candidates are also reluctant to leave their jobs in times of job insecurity. How you if you're seeing sourcing effectiveness plummet, what does a sourcing leader do in this day and age? What kind of interventions do you sort of suggest?
So what in my previous role at Grab, and I don't know if those of people on the call who don't know who Grab is, think of Uber of Southeast Asia. In fact,
Yeah.
Grab is partly owned by Uber, so very big across Southeast Asia. So one of the things that I did and we basically categorized all our roles. So we had like a pyramid thing. And we put priorities and categorizations on all the various roles in terms of what sourcing worked on or prioritized, right? But one of the things that I did, right, around cutting through the noise and getting a better outcome in terms of our sourcing, was I brought hiring managers into the equation, right? And what we did was, using the technology that we had, we were able to send outreach from a hiring manager. So you imagine yourself as, the senior back-end engineer, and you get an email from the chief technology officer at a company saying, hey, we love what you're doing, da 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 da. We'd love to talk to you about a great role that we have at Grab.
Oh, that
Right?
is incredible.
That actually, our open rates, if it was from the sourcer versus the hiring manager, the open rates didn't change a lot. But what changed was the reply rates. We went from 20, 30%, sometimes up to 80% response. And if you only had, if it was a niche role and you probably only had 20 or 30 people that you've outreached to, you get 80% response. Then that
Yeah,
significantly changes the game. So that was some of the things that I did. So really understanding the pain and getting the hiring managers into the equation early, because they have a really good brand, right? And candidates want to talk to them. They don't want to talk to recruiters. They want to talk to the hiring managers. So
that's
that's what we
right.
did.
That's exactly right. I love it.
Mm.
I love it. And actually, this is one of the areas when we talk about in the AI section, it's like such simple prompts and such, you can set this up so nicely right in that kickoff meeting with the hiring manager and give them the tools to help you be successful. And that's a big unlock. I love it. And I love some of the sharing that's happening on the chat as well. Thank you for some of those ideas. So habit two, write a job ad, not a job description. Now, I suspect almost everyone in this audience actually gets it. Like almost every experienced recruiter I've met fundamentally understands that job ads are different than job descriptions, that they matter. The problem has never been our appreciation. The problem has been, how do you get it done? How do we find the time and the day to convert that horrible tome of a job description into this really long job ad? One of the things that we've been analyzing, I think at this point we have more than 100 million job descriptions analyzed. And one of the things we did, sort of this heat map study, we found that on average, candidates are spending 7 to 10 seconds. We also found that on average, an average company, more people will view your jobs on LinkedIn, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, Seek, than will see your company's homepage, almost 3 times as much. So that brand is critical. But candidates don't have time, just like you don't have time to look at their resume end to end. They are really honing in on a few things. You'll notice this in the heat map. They're honing in on title, very, very important. I'm sorry. They're honing in on, anything around benefits and salary ranges. But even when it comes to responsibilities, they want to hone in on the one or two critical responsibilities, the critical skills, who I'll report to at the organization and who will report to me, where this location is where this role is located. And sometimes we just make it too hard to find those critical pieces of information in the job. We have 17 pages of boilerplate and a bajillion, requirements. Martin, one of the things you've done incredibly well is that you at Grab, hundreds of hiring managers were writing jobs, and you got them to think about job ads. You got your recruiters to think about job ads. How? How do you
Yeah.
change that mindset?
Yeah, like a lot of education, right? Because if you look at a job description, to me, a job description is a static document with a whole lot of internal bureaucracy. Doesn't really tell you a lot,
Yes.
right? But you need it, right? Whereas a job ad, I look at a job ad, it's like an article that I'm reading in a paper or online where that first paragraph is the hook that's going to want me to read the article, right? So that's how I look at a job ad, and the things that I think about a job ad, I have this acronym called CAD, compelling, authentic, and different. So if it's not compelling, if it's not authentic, and it's not different, people are not going to apply, right? So I think, and like you say, 7 to 10 seconds to look at it. So you don't have a lot of time to get someone's attention, right? But the other thing that I think around job ads, right, is things are changing. What the candidates are looking for is changing, right? Again, if I look in the tech space, they all wanted the pantry full of food and the ping pong table. I'm like, that's all
Yeah,
gone now. They want to know who they're working with, what growth they can get, who they can learn from, what impact they can have. So they're the sorts of things we've got to get into our job ads, right? To
I agree.
really to pull out those candidates that they're looking, but they're not looking, but they see your job and they think, wow, I want part of this, and they apply, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the approach that I take, and I think And it is a real skill, I think, to write a job ad. It's not something easy to do. It is a real skill.
It is real
So
skill.
yeah,
I love the point you said, like what we want from those jobs is changing. They want to know a reporting structure. We found even just a single sentence on who a candidate will report to in a job ad
yeah.
improves the time to fill materially. And like it's kind of bananas, but it gets the qualified candidates to want to say, okay, it's this is a very, if I'm reporting to a director level role, it kind of tells you immediately like where am I fitting in this organization, right?
Totally. Yeah,
Um,
that's what they need. That's what they want, right? Yeah. Mm.
one of the real unlocks that our customers have done, but also just great hiring teams do, is they template out a lot of those key elements so that reduces the cognitive load for hiring managers when they're writing. And you did this a lot. You built these incredible templates when you were at Grab. You locked them down. So when a hiring manager in Informatica is another company, does a beautiful job with this. When they start the template, it basically reduces the amount of time that somebody has to go back and forth and gets you down to like 5 minutes or less. If you can get your hiring manager to articulate this in 5 minutes or less, it just does in a consistent, authentic, and differentiated way, as you talk about, in a compelling way, it's a game changer. But we
Mm.
have to put in the work to make sure those templates are easily available, easily accessible. The worst is when a hiring manager, especially a new one in your organization, is like emailing an HR business partner, being like, where's a job I've seen before? Or they're worse, they're finding their own terrible jobs or doing their own terrible ChatGPT prompts to kind of come up with this. Uh, we know what a good job ad is. How do we get that there? So this, so let's talk about habit three. This is one of my favorite topics. And Martin, you talked about this right at the beginning, which is the
Mm.
hardest part is engaging your hiring managers. And oftentimes the biggest unlock. And I know this because in the last few workshops, when we've done polls, almost every single person, when we talk about AI, they're like, we get AI, our hiring managers don't get AI. When we talk about like, job board optimization, we're like, we get it, our hiring managers. It's very clear that hiring managers you know, as TA has gotten so much better, now we've got to figure out how to make this truly a team sport. So I'm going to ask you sort of what is your perfect intake meeting? When you're in the room with the hiring manager, how do you structure this to be a really productive meeting?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you've got to respect their time, right? So you've got to make sure that you go in with, the really high value critical questions, and not asking questions that, are not important at the time and are going to waste time. So things like, and you need to, you need to do a bit of research as well before you go, and you need to understand, about their business. And so what I really try and uncover is that what is their pain, right? What is their pain at the moment? Because if they've got pain in their terms of their hiring, then what that ultimately does, it gives you some leverage, right, to try things with them, right? If there's no pain, if there's no urgency, then they're just going to want to, plod along in terms of,
Yeah,
their hiring and so on. So that's some of the things that I do. It's really important to set expectation on all parties. But the things that I would cover in terms of an intake meeting, first of all, I want to know about I want to know about what's in it for the candidate. Why would someone want to take this job, right?
I love that.
What will they do? What impact will they have? What new skills would they gain? Who will they work with, right? How can this help them get to their next level, right? So they're the sorts of things that I want to understand. I want to know about the team. What makes the team tick, right?
Yeah,
And not only in a work environment, but outside of work. So because
yeah,
you spend a lot of your time or a lot of a lot of your day with these people, and then I will focus very much on the critical tasks that the person needs to perform, right? And these are I always try and make these very outcome based, right? With examples. And things you'll hear things like, oh, they will project manage, da 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 da. So I will always probe and understand more information what that means, right? So getting that detail. Then I want to understand, so what are the critical skills that they must bring to the table, right? And
yeah,
I'm looking for 5 or 6. I don't want 20. I want the
yeah.
critical ones. And then you know, a little bit about, you know, the process, but they're the main things that I would cover in a kickoff meeting. And then the most important thing that I will do is understand and align on the screening criteria, right? And how we go through our cadence process. So we will lock
Yeah.
in times to, you know, once a week, once every 3 days, whatever it may be, to do the cadence in terms of the role. Because what happens a lot I see with hiring managers when when you work on a role is, you know, if the role is misaligned, if all the stakeholders are misaligned at the start, then you know what you're working on is going to be wrong, right?
That's right.
So it can be aligned, but sometimes things will become misaligned, right? So you've got to be
Yeah.
constantly realigning. Things change, and maybe an
Yeah.
internal candidate is now coming to the picture. So it's
Yeah.
understanding all these sorts of information. So that's kind of the approach that I would take. And you know, you should be able to do that in 45 minutes. And I, you know, quite frankly, I have a script that I follow. I do it all the time. I follow a script. So I know and make sure that's that consistent engagement approach that I capture all the information, right? And now with some of the AI tools that we have, which can actually take all the notes for us and summarize it, is a game changer, right?
It's a
So
game
you know,
changer.
before you're kind of writing it down and trying to keep up, but now you don't
Yeah.
have to. So
Now
that's the
you're
sort of
hopefully
approach that I
present
take.
in the meeting.
Exactly, you're giving your 100% attention to the hiring manager, right? So that's kind of the approach that I take.
So we're getting some really interesting thoughts on the chat that I want to bring up to you, Martin. Firstly, I
Sure.
love Kate's idea, which Kate talked about how she started calling it a job launch session.
Yep.
And it is different. I've heard it as a strategy session, kickoff session. Um, we have to make our vocabulary sound like this is a partnership and not recruiting taking
Yep.
orders from hiring manager. There was a very thoughtful
Yep.
question in the chat as well, which is what do you ask the hiring managers to do beforehand? And how do you get them to do it? Like how do you get them to come prepared?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really important, right? And you know, unfortunately, you don't get married on the first date, right? So it does take a time. It does take time. So there's a lot of education, right? So and it's also about consistent communication, like you say, using the right
Yeah.
sorts of words, right? But you know, like as I said, you know, we had a template and we had a lot of structure. So we would send a pre expectations and kind of what we want to cover and where we want to be at the end.
That's
And we'd also
yeah.
share the template to them so they knew what questions were coming, right? Now,
Yeah.
did all hiring managers look at it? No. Did some? Yes. And often what I found was the ones that really took this approach and really partners with it, they're the ones that we got the best results with, right?
That's right.
So the ones that didn't, you know, they're the ones that, you know, were never happy with what you did and were chopping and changing. So I think again,
Yeah.
it's having a consistent process and using that consistent language and not
That's right.
deviating from it, right? And if
Yeah.
someone, you know, like if you get, you know, if you get a hiring manager that doesn't want to do it, doesn't think they need to do it, it's about educating them and
Yeah.
explaining to them why we need to do it. And you know, and I've used examples where, you know, like if someone in the business came to you to, you know, add a new function to the product, and they weren't prepared to give you the time to tell you what it was, would you do it? Of course not, right? So, but they
That's
expect us to
exactly
do
right.
that. So I think sometimes you just got to push back and give them an example that in their world that they can kind of translate, and then kind of the penny drops. Yeah.
I really like the part where you talked about pain. I don't think we do that enough. And I like the part you talked about what the candidate will get from this. Because oftentimes I see when I'm observing intake meetings or kickoff meetings happen, is we get straight into what are you looking for? What do you need?
Yeah.
What's the role? What's the job title? What's the requirements? What's the responsibilities? But I do like the idea of connecting it back to the pain because let's say it's an engineering manager, which feature is being bottlenecked right now because you don't have
Yeah.
this person in seat. And that forces them to prioritize because the number one mistake hiring managers make is I want everything. I want the perfect
Yeah.
qualifications. And then you're like, when you get into, oh, why is this job urgent? We can actually get into trade-offs.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. And you know, I think it's really important that the trade-off bit is something really critical, right? Because often you'll have a hiring manager, he'll give you the shopping list or they'll say, you know, they must come from these companies, or they must come from this, you know, education background. And that to me is like, okay, I'm going to test this. So I will say, so if I have a really good candidate that fits all the skills and got the experience, but they don't come from those candidates, you don't want to see that candidate? Oh, yeah, I want to see it.
Yeah,
So,
it's just
you know,
bananas.
you've got to test, you've got to test the boundaries that you have to work in, right? And I think that's the role of a recruiter. You know,
Yeah,
that's the advisory consultative bit. Because when I walk out of that door from the hiring manager, I want to make sure that I've got, you know, 90% or 80% of the information that I need to go and do the job. And also when you get that sort of information, and especially around the team and the pay and all that kind of stuff, that then feeds into your job ad, right? It
that's right.
feeds into your screening call. It feeds into,
It's
you know,
feeds into
selling
everything.
the opportunity. So if you don't have that information, what does a candidate ask? So tell us about the team. Tell us about the pain. If you don't have that information, then you've lost the candidate, right? You know, when you
Exactly.
talk to they're sitting at the back of the bus. If you don't have that information to move them to the front, then you've lost them, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's really, really critical.
I feel like recruiting is one of the hardest jobs in the world, right? Because like it's like sales, except sales you get to sell the same product for the most part every day, and recruiting you got to sell a different product every day,
Yeah,
a
totally.
different team, a
Yeah,
different job.
yeah, you know, and yeah, and
It's
and like you said, you know, some recruiters, you know, working on 50 recs or is crazy, and if they're, you know, 25 or 30 different types of recs, that's like almost impossible, right? So, and then we've got all the things that we need to balance, you know, and really, in my view, there's only two things as a recruiter that you have control over, and that's your time and your prioritization, right?
yeah,
So, you know, I can't control that 5 new recs are going to land in my inbox today, or that candidate that I closed last week is now pulled out, right? So you've got to
yeah,
be able to manage your time and prioritize. And if you don't do that, you know, you're sick. And especially now, like what you talked about up front, where, you know, the teams are a lot smaller, hiring managers still want the same level of service, if not higher. And
that's
our
right.
rec loads is not, you know, is still very similar. And in some cases, we're being asked to do other things as well on top of,
It's
you know, filling recs. So it's, yeah, it's the toughest job on the planet. Yeah,
it
it really
is.
is.
One of the things that we found in our data was that on average, 30% of recs failed. So we put 100
Yeah,
recs and 30% don't work. The worst part about it was it wasn't that those 30% of recs failed were failing fast. Like, so if your average rec took 60 days to fill, these 30% of recs often took 80, 90, 100 days before we decided we gave up, we are going to shut it
yeah,
down. And the amount of capacity that gets sucked up, I'm sure all of you can relate, like the amount of capacity that like the 3 or 4 really problematic recs suck up in
yeah,
your day is just insane. So I wanted to give 2 simple tips on how to drive this. The tip one is market calibration. In that meeting with the hiring manager, so we have this very popular feature in Datapeople called similar jobs. But even if you don't, just go to Indeed, go to LinkedIn, find 5 similar jobs to your job you're hiring. Too often hiring managers are like, I need an MBA. I need some crazy level of educational experience. And the single best way to convince them is to show them what their competitor, what the competition's asking for. It's
mm,
hard because we're in these rooms sometimes as recruiters, and the hiring manager has 30 years of experience in this space, and it feels like there's a power differential, like we can't push back on them. The best way to push back on them is data.
yeah.
And if you're a Datapeople customer and you haven't checked out this feature, let us know and we'll walk you through this. The second
And
thing, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Ms. I just want to add something. I totally align to this, right? And if you think about where we are now as recruiters with, you know, AI coming along, and, you know, the big promise that it's going to free up a lot of our time from doing those mundane tasks and that. I think the big challenge for recruiters is if we get 25% of our time back, where do we put that time and get the best bang for our buck? And what I'm seeing, or what I believe, is in doing stuff like this. So doing all that market intelligence, having that deep domain knowledge in terms of the market that you work in, right? And the business that you work with, because this is what is the value add that you can really add to a
It's
business and have a huge impact. And what happens when you do that? credibility with the hiring manager goes through the roof, right? And the
Yeah.
trust goes through the roof. So, this is where we need to put that time that we get into this sort of stuff. This
And your
is where
credibility with
recruiting
your
needs to move.
org goes through the roof. Exactly.
Totally,
Like you
totally.
suddenly
Yep,
become that person who can
yep,
can really align.
yeah, yeah, totally.
One of the things that AI can do, we think a lot about how AI can help us do things that we are already doing faster. And I think one of the things that AI can do is actually do things that we are not doing at all. We just that we couldn't. And we explored this. If you were on the call we had on AI on the AI piece, I suggested this prompt, and I want to share it again. It's a very simple prompt that you can copy and use, and we shared it in the cheat sheet at the start of this on the chat. And I'm actually going to show it to you. So if you're in preparing for an intake meeting, what I would recommend, I'm just going to quickly pull this up in ChatGPT so you can see it for yourself. If I'm preparing for an intake meeting for, say, a demand generation manager, what I would love to have are 5 example profiles of candidates that force the hiring manager to make trade-offs, that force them to think about the role in different ways. So I put this prompt in. I'm a recruiter. You'll notice the best ChatGPT prompts are very long, so you have to template them. And these work in Gemini and Copilot too, by the way. I'm a recruiter at a large SaaS company hiring a demand generation marketing manager. And I want 5 different examples of roles, of profiles of candidates that might apply. Someone from a small startup, a large company, a lot of direct demand generation experience, a generalist marketers, and I give them the full job ad. And it does a beautiful job of giving me these illustrative job profiles. So instead of having to go to LinkedIn and try to find, profiles of people, it gives me a really good job of actually creating these synthetic illustrative job profiles. And then in that intake meeting, I put it in front of the hiring manager and I ask her, rank them, rank these 5 candidates. Are you comfortable? Because that's when we start to get at, okay, do you really want a demand gen person, or are you okay with, somebody who is a generalist? Do you really want somebody with startup experience? Or are you okay with somebody from a larger company? Like, let's get to the bottom. Otherwise, we often just add skills and requirements in the job in a vacuum rather than thinking about trade-offs.
Yeah.
And this used to be really hard to do before these AI tools, and we can use them to kind of speed up our life so much. So this prompt is right there if you want to pull it up and test it right now. But tell me how it works. I'm really excited to see. And we already have a lot of AI in Datapeople. We're baking a lot of these right in here so you can sort of just speed up these workflows and every recruiter can have them at their fingertips.
And again, this is the alignment piece, right? So if you can test the hiring manager with the profiles, you get alignment, right? And
You get
you can,
incredible alignment.
you move forward with alignment. You don't move forward making it up as you go, right?
Exactly.
So that's the really critical thing here.
And sticking with AI, I wanted to go straight to tip number 4, which is how do we use AI better? Like, there's no denying we're in a golden age of a new technology, and we're going to but it is confusing. I mean, Martin, you go to conferences and see it. Like, half the time, I don't even know what product or what's the solution that somebody's solving with their new AI tool. So I'm going to say something
Mm.
controversial to all of you. I don't think the best AI tools today are necessarily recruiting tools. I think that the way and the speed with which Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude are evolving, they're often going to be the best of the best. And if we can use them better, we're setting ourselves up for a world in which the recruiting tools will come. So the versions of the recruiting tools we're seeing today are still rudimentary. And so if you're buying a recruiting tool for AI, I'd actually buy it for the workflow, not for the AI today. And I say this as an AI vendor. I say this in all honesty. The models are evolving very, very rapidly. I want to ask you, you're hearing agentic everywhere. Is the average company ready for it? What do we do with it?
I don't know if we're ready for it. I think we probably need to become more literate about what it actually means.
Yes.
Because I'm sure everyone on this call really understands or knows what agentic is, but in a nutshell, it's kind of it's autonomous, right? It's like a self-driving car. It drives itself. It doesn't need or needs very little input from a human to change lanes, and it learns and adapts. So that's pretty much what agentic is all about, right? So I think we need to be really clear in terms of what we're trying to solve. But what I see a lot of technology out there, they talk about agentic AI, but what I see it's automation, right? And automation
Yeah.
just
It's
follows a
just
whole lot of
chaining
rules.
two things together. Yeah.
Exactly. It just follows rules, right? It's a structured rules, whereas, true AI or agentic AI, can think and adapt for itself. So, look, the technology is, as you said, AI, the development, it's not a curve, it's almost like a vertical line, right? It's just happening at speed, which is
Yeah.
also a bit of a challenge for all of us, right? To keep up with it, right? So I think there's a number of things we need to think about. And if we're going to look at these AI platforms, and I still believe that, the human, the recruiter still needs to do the critical thinking. You still need to be making the decision based on what the agentic AI serves up to you, right? And I
Yeah.
think if any vendor comes along and says, you don't need the human in it, then they're probably the ones that I would turn around and run away from at 100 mile an hour, right? So, but like I think interesting times. I don't think there's been anything that I can remember in my time in recruitment where that has been so, um, you know, changing of what we do than
Yeah.
AI and what we're getting now. But look, I would ask if you're talking to companies about AI and in terms of your what you're looking to do, just ask lots of questions. Really dig and probe and ask lots of questions, right? And one thing that I've found with some of these vendors is, and again, this is not a criticism, but I think maybe it's a concern, is sometimes you get these technology companies who are building HR tech, but they actually don't understand our industry, right?
Yeah.
So, that domain knowledge, having sat in your seat, is really important because then they can kind of relate to, what we do and how we go about it. So
They don't
I would just
understand the
ask,
workflows.
yeah, I'd ask lots of questions. And
Yeah.
again, the other thing that I think is really important with these vendors is their customer success, right? So, you don't want someone that's going to put the technology in and run. You want them to kind of grow with you and help you enhance, your capability, your workflows, your processes, and make sure the technology is embedded and it's getting you're getting the significant incremental gain that you signed up for.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I want to talk a little bit about, in order for us to be really good at evaluating AI platforms, we have to become really good power users of the
Yeah. Yeah.
accessible platforms. So one of the things I continue to notice is how poorly people prompt. Um,
Mm.
very poorly. And we shared this again last time, so apologies if this is a little repetitive. But one of the founders of OpenAI provided an incredible anatomy of a prompt. It's what we use in all of the prompts in our cheat sheets and the examples we give you. It's like that framework of how to, you know, prompts are almost like having a little bit of programming language. You want to be very, very specific and build the right context, or think of it as working with a much more inexperienced teammate. You want to be very, very clear in your directions. And so we like this format, the goal, the format, the warnings, the context. And if you're not prompting like this, I strongly recommend bringing this into your prompts because it's going to make a big difference. I also wanted to offer up just a few tips of tooling. So before we do that, actually, just let's say a great example. So let's say you want to build you want your hiring manager coming out of that kickoff meeting to write a great social media post about this job. We kind of do it this way, I'm hiring for a social. This is sort of this is your, what do we call it? The goal. Then you give them the format, then you give them the warnings, and you give them all the context. And it works beautifully. Like you'll see this. I did this for the demand gen manager role, and it does a beautiful job creating a nice LinkedIn version with bold and italics that tells you a little bit about what this job is. I hate it when I see people on LinkedIn saying, I'm hiring this job, and it's just the link. It's like, it's
Yeah.
such a wasted opportunity to talk about why somebody should join your incredible team, your incredible organization. And that's what we should be doing. I also wanted to bring up three simple, inexpensive tools you should consider. So I'm going to do a shameless plug for Datapeople. We make AI really easy, and you can instantly implement it in your stack. But I want to give you two tools that I've fallen in love with that are not recruiting AI, but have made my life a lot easier, and they're free. The first is this tool called Distill. It's in waitlist. It's a very simple tool that does deep candidate and company research. So it basically does deep meeting attendee research, but it's fantastic for candidate research. So it sort of assembles from GitHub and all of their different sources. You're going into an interview. It gives you some really great places to start. You can build lists right in there. It's free and I love it. I'm addicted to it. It's LinkedIn plus 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 plus. The other tool I really like is a tool called Granola. Many of you might be using this. There's many, many note takers, and I found this is one of the best context note takers. And it's so simple, and it doesn't add a note taker to your meeting. It's sort of like it just works in the background. So I love playing with tools outside of TA because they're almost like the leading edge of what's going to eventually make it into TA. So these are a couple of the tools I'm really fond of today. And I'm going to open this audience and say, are there tools that you are loving outside of TA that you would advocate for others to try out? Martin, anything that you said you're a big Gemini user. What do you use?
Yeah.
What's your favorite use
So,
case? You said video?
so yeah, that's kind of a bit of fun, but in terms of a work environment, we were using Gemini and ChatGPT for, doing our writing up our screening questions, for example, or doing
Yeah.
JDs and all that kind of stuff. Right? We even did it. I would convert ad copy from English to Mandarin that we would post in China, right on Bossipan. So and it
Yeah.
was, and I can't speak or translate Mandarin, but it did it all for me. So there's lots of uses that you can use it for, right? So, but these tools are great. The note taker and the summary of all your notes is like, no one, I used to have notepads piled on my desk. Now I don't have to buy those anymore. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So look, I think one of the tools that I really like out there, it is a HR or recruiting tool. And it is free. It's from a company called MetaView, and it's called hiring.solve. So it will create a whole lot of interview questions for you. But
Oh,
even
nice.
better, it creates a Rubik's and tells you what a good answer, what an average answer, and what a bad answer is. Right. So we used that, gave it to the hiring manager, the hiring manager would tick off. So that was how
Yeah.
we built our screening questions very fast, right? Or you could use a chat GPT to do it. But yeah, look, there's lots of tools out there. But I think the thing to be careful is, don't be that person that walks out of the lift with the 80 tools on your tool belt, because you'll never get any
Yeah.
work done.
Yeah. Just just get going and make
Yeah.
these things a habit as much as you can.
Yeah.
Well,
Experiment. Try stuff.
exactly. Exactly. Last tip for all of you, compliance. And compliance is sort of this incredible catalyst. We're in a world where, let's be honest, we're incredibly insecure almost in TA. And one of the things that we want to make sure and compliance requirements keep adding up. We got to make sure that we're just knowledgeable, thoughtful on top of that. And this ends up becoming the biggest drain. The number of times I'm seeing recs slow down because we publish them and then we unpublish them to go back and fix something in them or like fix the brand or fix the compliance and then republish them. And that's 2 weeks of our life we're not getting back. So how do we fix that? So I have four simple checklists for all of you. Pay transparency is one of the biggest compliance problems. Is your rec in a pay transparency location? You should know that. And then what does it entail? And if you don't, with simple guides, we have a great guide. We can share it with you. We're going to do a session on it as well in a couple of weeks. Number two, am I using the right job profile for this level family? The number one reason why often recs just get the worst examples I've seen of wastage of time is we go all the way and the candidate and the job description have a different salary expectation than your internal finance and comp team, and you can't get the offer approved. And it's like you've got this perfect candidate and you cannot bridge the gap between their ask and what you're willing to pay. And it comes down to were you using the right profile to begin with? Did we build the job ad in the right way? Did it align with comp to get going? The third compliance element is brand. The number of times that I'm seeing, so it's so hard to build, and every company I know is building their employer value proposition. Are you using the right template? Are you using the right brand? And finally, one of the things that's really frustrating recruiters is all the changes of Indeed, LinkedIn, Seek are making, all the changes the job boards are making. Are you complying with them? Are you using the right hashtags? They make such a big difference to your job performance. I'm seeing a lot of hybrid jobs getting classified as remote or classified, and it just massively changes the number of applicants you get, the quality of applicants you get, and it becomes a time sink. And that's what we've got to make sure. So in terms of compliance, this is some of the things that we're seeing. And I hope you're thinking a lot about it. And we automate a lot of this in the platform. So we'd love to talk to you about it if this is something that's a pain point. But it's one of the things that you should be using AI tooling to just speed up and massively improve. So that's our 5 simple tips. Your 3 minutes left, Martin. What did I miss? Are there other things that you've seen make high performance recruiters just tick?
Look, I think a few things. One is, I think, curiosity. Be really
I
curious, ask lots of
exactly.
questions, and really try and understand why. That's probably the one thing. I think the other thing, like I always take approach of, seek to understand. I
Yeah.
think is really important. But and work really closely with your hiring managers. You use the hiring manager's brand. And partner with them. Sit by the side of them and help them. Right, if they need to write a new job description or job ad for you, sit there and help them do it, or develop some templates or some guides or the things that you've shared and make it easy for them. Right, if you make it easy,
Yeah.
if then they'll do it. Right, if it's hard, if it's time consuming, then they won't. They're indifferent about it. But yeah, I think be curious. Seek to understand. And experiment. Try stuff. Like doing the same thing and expecting a different result is like insanity, right? So in today's world, we've got to experiment, we've got to try stuff, right? And the last thing I would say, and I really push this with my team, right? Celebrate your wins and tell everyone, right? Because
Yeah.
it's really important as TA. We tend to kind of be in the bunker, right? And we don't tend to kind of yell loud enough, in my view, that the impact that we have, and let's face it, TA builds the capability of a company. Without TA, the company doesn't grow. It doesn't
Yeah.
evolve. So we have a really important role to do, but I think we just need to really sell, what we do more.
I love the idea. I mean, I want to be actually even more specific on celebrating the wins because I've often seen one of the really good habits that's come about in the last few years is we do retros. We do retros when a hiring process failed or we hired a candidate wrongly. We
Yeah.
sit with our hiring managers. We think a lot about failure. One of the
Mm.
things that I don't think we do enough of is we don't do retros of when we got a great hiring process, when we got a great
Yeah.
outcome. Like, you're talking about finding that unicorn candidate who could speak Chinese and be a general counsel and have all of that experience. We don't try to articulate why those types of successes happen, even
Yeah.
for ourselves. And
Yeah.
that feels like a shame. It feels like a lost opportunity to share our learnings.
I agree because like everything's speed, speed, speed. Like as soon as we've done one, we move on to the next one, and often even if it's a good outcome, you can learn. There's things that maybe you could do better. So I think going back and checking with your stakeholders, because they're the ones that are going to give you a really good they're the best judge of your work, right?
Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of this incredible session. Thanks, Martin, for sharing. I feel like I've learned so much just in this one session. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for sharing their thoughts and their tips and ideas as we went along. This was a lot of fun. So, Martin,
Yeah.
it's 11 p.m. your time. I'm going to have to let you go now and call it. But thank you again for joining us so late from Singapore and for sharing this incredible wisdom.
Thanks for the invite, Em, and I really enjoyed it. So it was great fun. Look forward to the next one.
You too.
And yeah, hope everyone has a great Wednesday. And yeah, and just one last thing I'd like to leave you with. I'm in the future.
That's exactly right. He is in the
Think
future.
that think about that one.
And we're all catching up. All right, everyone.
Yeah.
You have a wonderful week. We'll talk to you all soon. See you at our next workshop. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.